So my name is Bryn King. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of California, Berkeley, in the Social Welfare Department. I'm interested in how kids who have been in foster care, who have been exposed to foster care, fare in other domains. First and foremost, it's really important to know what's happening. What we think is happening is not always what's happening. So we have lots of ideas about what we think, for example, the effects of foster care are, who's involved in the foster care system, or why children get involved in the foster care system. And I think looking at outcomes really helps us to clarify what's happening, at least on a systemic level. The other reality is that at this point, child welfare policy is really driven by these outcomes and by how outcomes are structured and how data is used to inform decisions about what's the next policy or how do we measure things that are going on. So looking at outcomes is really essential in that process, both in terms of improving practice, addressing policy issues, and improving services for kids and families in the system. Yeah, I mean, I have to say that at this point, I don't look at an issue without sort of asking some questions from the aggregate data. One reason is because it's always useful to put in any paper that you write, start out with a real definition of the problem, at least on an aggregate level. So there is nothing that I do that doesn't start out with me kind of taking a quick look at the data. There's a new policy that's the AB 12, which is about keeping kids in foster care until they're 21. So we just took a look at some data to look at how many kids were staying in care since that law was implemented, and found that more older youth are choosing to stay in care. We don't know the dynamics of that, but at least it tells us that on some level this policy is being implemented and that kids are staying in care. And what those the benefits for those kids will be, we'll look at later, but at least in the short term, that's what's happening. Before you explore the data, decide what your question is. What are you really interested in? And think about something that really excites you, or makes you mad. Like what's most important to you, because that's going to really help you stay focused when you're presented with all of these options. So be focused, look at the topics menu rather than at the measure list, because that's going to give you a sense of how things are organized. And then once you get to a measure that you're interested in looking at, start with the defaults. Don't get overwhelmed by all of the options. Those are there for people who are much more comfortable with the data, and you will learn how to use it as long as you start simple. So go through, use all the defaults, get your first table of data and a chart. Think about that. Think about like what other questions you might have. So say if you're just interested in allegations, how many allegations are happening in my county? How many kids are reported to the system? And maybe how many kids are substantiated? Start with looking at allegation rates, and then think, okay, well, I wonder how this varies by age or by race or by allegation type, and then begin to filter things through the additional questions you have. So let your thinking drive your use of the data. Absolutely. And I think it's useful for a number of reasons. I think one, it's useful for their own practice, to understand what's happening with kids who they're working with, who they're investigating, who they're placing, who they're working with in placement, and what's going on with the families around them. So it informs practice, but also, it helps them to put the decisions that are made by their supervisors into a context. And then I think a third reason is that this is the direction that all kind of social services are going in, is really looking at outcomes. If you're comfortable with using data, at least like aggregate level data, and putting things in tables and understanding what it looks like and how to retrieve it, you're going to be an invaluable asset to the counties that you work in. They're going to love you, they're going to need you, they're going to rely on you, and you're going to feel better about the work that you're doing because you understand the larger context.